Alrighty. So anyway, I had a little chat dialogue here. I wasn't really planning on recording it. I didn't really feel like talking to anybody, so I was just kind of like, oh, let's just do a little chat thing. So I don't know. I did this for like 3 sessions. I had one guy who was a racist denying the existence of systemic racism. He basically said there's no evidence and then quit, which is highly demonstrative of his intellect. But no, I had a conversation with a Muslim here. Or a Sharia law supporter, and my God, this guy kept going, and I don't know, man. It's just kind of pathetic. So anyway, it started off pretty civil, but basically, yeah. So I basically start off. So yeah, I said, what do you like about Sharia law? He's like, justice. He's like, really? Or I'm like, really? What kind of justice may I ask? And I don't know, he's patient, so I just kind of let this go on for way too fucking long, because they just ask such stupid questions. But yeah, anyway. So I say, hey, what kind of justice? He's like, justice is one. It doesn't have multiform. I'm like, well, this presumes an underlying moral philosophy that may not agree on. I'm trying to find common grounds we may discuss. And then he said, and I made a typo or whatever. He's like, I understand, it's the justice that we need, absolute justice. I'm like, are you familiar with the concept of a loaded term? He's like, bruh, justice. I'm like, so you aren't familiar. He's like, we will not achieve absolute justice, but we can achieve the objective application justice. Justice is a loaded term, but I'm talking about how the application we follow to try to achieve justice. So he's talking about the, Sharia as a practice to achieve justice. So then I'm like, okay, speaking of loading terms, we'll do nothing to further our discussion as we are operating off of 2 different moral philosophies. Let's explore this application you speak about. Explore it. And I'm like, I think we should start with a goal and figure out how to best achieve it. He's like, well, what does justice look like to you? Who are bad and who are good, for example? And I'm like, why are they bad? Why are they good? And I just threw in there, Christian could say the same thing. Like, this does nothing to help me. And he says, I'm waiting. I'm like, I don't know what form of Sharia you believe. You're not giving me much to go off of. This guy says, no poor people, everyone is safe, no racism. I'm like, okay, thank you. Which leads me to believe this guy isn't he's probably a younger dude. And probably has done a lot of studying, which I'm fairly familiar with because I grew up very Christian. And I spent a lot of time around the philosophy and theology and all that kind of shit. So yeah, I say, what applications? He's like, Sharia law. I'm like, what specifically? Explain the rationale. I'm still very patient, even though he's just like circularly stated his argument 2 times at this point. And then he says, every country has laws. I'm like, okay, individuals in society follow these laws. Yes. Then it depends on what are these laws. And I'm like, correct. And he's like, is it subjective or objective? And I'm like, well, I think it's always relative to the situation. We might have different laws in the US and Canada. And he said, I support the laws that are taken from Islamic teaching. I'm like, why do you support the laws from Islamic teaching? He's like, because it achieves justice. So circular again. And then he talks about zakah, which is like almsgiving. And I clarified, thank you for specifying. He asked me if I'm female, probably because he's a sexist fuck. And he says, no, why? And zakah, I'm like, zakah sounds fine. I mean, he says, never mind. He's like, you're either a female or a philosopher, which I have no idea what that means. So anyway, that's fine. This all started out fine. I'm like, so hey, give me a differentiator from all other moral philosophies. And he says, God. I'm like, Christians believe in God. I'm like, so do Jews and Hindus. And he's like, Christianity is emotional, not a rational belief. Another loaded term, but I think I see what you're getting at. You value rationality, correct? Yeah, because he would have said, Christianity is emotional, not rational. So, Christianity has contradictions, can't be a religion of God. For example, Jesus is fully God, but he didn't know the hour. Sure thing, I'd agree, depending on the interpretations. And Jesus is God, but he prays to God, and God kills God to save humans. He's attacking the Trinity there. So are all other religions just a rational view? He's like, not necessarily. And he's like, Hinduism is not a religion, it's actually a philosophy. I'm like, okay, and like depends on the time and place, because it does. Then he says they believe in God. They believe God is everywhere in nature. I'm like, so is it irrational? Because we haven't contended with secular views yet. He says, which is kind of atheistic to me. They also don't have a connection to God. And I said, who says a religion involves a connection to God? Well, God in all cases. He says the only three religions that could be right is Islam, Christianity, Judaism, which is a conclusion I had. I can understand it. You're more convinced by monotheism, basically. So I'm like, okay, sure thing. From your view, how do we differentiate? Because it seems like every time I say something, you move to another differentiator once I question it. He said, yes, but I don't want to make any points. I'm like, why not? And he's like, I can if you want. I'm like, Islam makes sense. Other religions do not. Islam is historically validated, and other religions are not, which Islam is not historically validated. Christians kind of say the same thing, but you run into the situation where it's pretty much impossible to prove miracles or even substantiate probability towards them, considering they're inherently unlikely events. And I've kind of just said, like, I'm not just talking about the religions. So I'm like, I could speed this along with you prefer. He's like, what then? I'm like, if I had to guess, you have the following principles: monotheism, deontology, rationality, and science. And this correct? Yes, I like it. I'm like, okay, good, just checking. Don't want to strawman. You're just trying to be more charitable, you know. And do you think science proves God in any element of Islam? And he said, yes. And I'm like, okay, which one? You mean which God or which element? I'm like, okay, yeah, sorry about that. Either or. He says, absolutely, yes. Scientifically, we can come to the conclusion that God exists. And I said, I could see maybe philosophically, but not scientifically. I'm familiar with cosmological arguments, and I am. So he says the law of causality, which is cosmological arguments. So he says, please don't mention philosophy again, probably because he's not super... I don't know why he would have a problem with that, but whatever. I guess I won't pontificate. So I said, I said, sure, in response to the law of causality, but this isn't testable when it comes to the concept of God. That's what makes the argument philosophical as opposed to scientific. And he says, science can lead us to God using the law of causality. Science can't prove or disprove metaphysical because science is universal. So he said, so I say, okay, now this statement shows you disagree with your statement from earlier, which is scientifically we come to the conclusion that God exists. And he says, we can. I'm like, okay, cool. So it can merely lead to it. Okay, just checking. Not trying to gotcha. So, you know, I just talk about my spelling just to kind of make him feel like I'm not trying to be an overzealous douche. So I would argue that we are in a position where we can perhaps use conjecture to come to God, but it is by no means proven yet. Given that it is not proven, we should focus on science to promote preferable laws and conclusions. You agree? Or we can, of course. Because, I think abortion is one of those things where you can't really use science. I mean, there's obviously bases of it, but I think to come to the conclusion, that's largely a philosophical position. Which I guess every position is technically philosophical. But yeah, so he says, so what do you want? Do you want to prove God exists? I'm like, no, I'm familiar with cosmological arguments. So what? I understand them quite well. Have you know? Yeah, okay. So Sharia law does not always align with science, or do you disagree? Science is compatible with Islam. Is Islam compatible with gay rights? And he says, what are gay rights? I'm like, give me an example. But sure thing, the right to vote, the right to exist, the right to be with who they want to be with, i.e. to live as any other normal human would want to live in a free society. I value freedom, you see. The right to be with who they want to be, as long as it doesn't affect society. Elaborate. And public homosexuality affects society, which is a super generalized statement. And he says it makes it unproductive. I'm like, to clarify, do you mean public as in being able to hold hands with the boyfriend in public with people around? And he's like, no, like kissing in marriage. I'm like, so you would deny them the right to do what all people can consensually do in a free society? He says, what's that? I mean, straight people have the right to kiss people in public in Western countries. Are allowed to get married. Are they not? We have more freedom in this regard, you see, no? If you're going to productivity next, let me know. It's not related to freedom, is what he says. And I said, of course it is. Do you not understand economics? And what I was getting at this is more like, if you allow people to have more freedoms, what happens is they tend to function better in society, which allows them to contribute more to the economy. So this is generally a good principle for allowing people to have human rights, and in turn it also contributes to the economy because they can tend to focus on their careers better, do a better job, generate more market engagement effectively. So I said, when you're racist against black people, they have a harder time contributing to the economy. And there's going to be some fucking racist out there who's going to talk about slavery. But for all us sane people, when you have black people in shittier schools, they're not going to do as well in their careers, generally speaking, so that means that they don't contribute to the economy as well. They're also not going to have as many funds to spend on good things in the economy, so they're going to have to resort to other means or just simply withhold spending altogether. So he said, I told you homosexuality negatively affects production. I say, what kind of production and society? And I say, I'm going to keep asking specifying questions when you use loaded language, just a heads up, because, it's like you keep using that shit, you don't get to anything specific. And I'm like, these arguments are coming off circular. He said human beings are created male and female, which is not true. A male and female complete each other. So this is an example where Islam does not address academic consensus. You are applying a universal principle to a complicated multivariate situation. This is exactly how racist people think, just in a different context. Not that you were racist, to be clear. It's just the same epistemology, which he did mention racism is something he wants to not have. He said, do you know common sense? I said, yes, common sense is a worthless tautology utilized by those stuck in a cultural environment to avoid change and progress, both of which are encompassed in the role of science. Deontology has no place here. Science challenges common sense. Then he says, let me give you an example. I'm like, sure thing. He said, okay, your society is free, right? I'm like, not completely, but it is better than many places. He said, okay, would you go outside naked? I'm like, it depends. And I said, perhaps there's a fire and I need to exit quickly. This is standard protocol. He says, no, normal case. I'm like, also, this situation has no bearing on gay marriage. It really doesn't. And I ask, because I'm trying to be charitable, I'm trying to engage with literally everything this fucking guy says. And so I just say, what do you mean by normal? He's like, would you walk in the streets? I said, likely not, but there could be scenarios where the environment would dictate abnormal solutions. Which that, it's me trying to say, like, generally probably not, because of social pressure. But anyway, I get to that later. So then he says, the weather is so hot, you want to go out, maybe the summer vacation or something, would you go naked or dress? Well, I likely wear clothes to not get sunburned, although there are counterfactuals. He says, I think you're trying to escape the question. And you could say that, but it's just, you're operating off of black and white, and I'm operating off of relativism and postmodernism. It's totally different in the sense of just you were looking through things as yes, no, and I'm kind of looking through things as, okay, it's complicated, which is objectively more accurate than yes, no. Then I say my point is there will always be a likely, and I should have maybe highlighted that word likely because the likely is kind of where it matters. It's just a simple question. I'm like, rarely an absolute. Is it, would you go outside naked? And I say, makes sense, likely not, as I already answered. He's like, okay, why? Well, it depends on the situation. However, for the sake of argument, I'll accept your black and white painting of reality to steelman your position. I said, no, I would not go outside naked. He says, why? Because a social oppressor. He says, let's suppose your country allowed going naked. Then I would likely go out naked. Well, he said, would you? I'm like, see, you have to change the scenario. I think that was more of a criticism at his verbiage, which is utterly lazy and very colloquial. He said, see, you have to change the scenario. I already answered. Above, that is. They said, would you not feel shame? I said, not likely, because it's societally normalized, and I chose to use likely there. And I said, but I might if I have a blemish. He said, is it okay for someone to marry his mother or sister? I'm like, great job pivoting away, by the way. Great job. Just to clarify my spelling mistake. And I said, this is a much more analogous example. I said, I would likely not. If someone had a gun to my head or her head, I wouldn't want them to get shot. And I try to apologize for my typos because, I'm trying to be charitable. And then I say, you get one more try, then I have a question for you. And he said, go ahead, this conversation is useless anyway. And that's because you ask bad questions. That's what I say, ask better questions. It is not possible to make sense of common sense for someone who has lost common sense, or common sense doesn't make sense for them anymore. Which is the stupidest fucking, useless statement. It's just the most circular shit. And I said, when I bring up the notion that Islam does not align with academia, and this is the question that I specified I wanted to ask, you immediately pivot to common sense, which immediately tells me that I want nothing to do with Sharia law as an instantiated system. Why? Let me and this is more, the why is in reference to this stupid, I say why? Let me address your point, though. Yeah, okay. And then he questions, and we're kind of typing at the same time, so that's why a bunch of this comes out and it's a little bit incoherent. But he says, well, what's academia? It doesn't align with your academia. And And then I say, it's not possible to make sense of common sense for someone who lost common sense. Yeah, okay, so that's me. This is me addressing his question. This is a baseless statement that is not rooted in science or reason. It is actually committing the fallacy of begging the question, which it is. To be most charitable to your claim, common sense is determined by culture. Hence why everybody has different definitions of common sense, which would mean that your definition of common sense and other people's definition of common sense really doesn't make sense because it's all relative, and it doesn't actually tell us what to do in a particular situation. So I can only fathom. I could. So, and then he says, "What's academia?" So I'm like, okay, well, what's academia? Academia is an institution dedicated to perfecting different methodologies that best instantiate our understanding of the world. This is done through history, science, philosophy, logic, statistics, math, etc., all of which you pivoted away from when challenged. You chose a cultural instantiation as your epistemological foundation as opposed to objective fact, which is science and reason. As for it doesn't align with your academia, I can only fathom that your solution to this is the disease rate. I thought he was talking more about like, oh, science doesn't support like gay people existing or something stupid like that. So I take the most racist or bigoted fucking argument, which is the disease rate, which people use to talk about gay people. And that's me trying to be charitable to his trash position. So anyway, I can only find a solution to this disease rate. And then I respond and I say, in which case, medical experts support things like sex education, medical solutions, etc., which actually help LGBTQ people function better in society, and thus contribute to a fuller, more successful economy. You see, we've figured this out already, but keep relying on common sense if you want. I'll trust science, economics, math, and academia. He says, okay, good luck on this. And I say, oh, we all will, and this is why our nations are at the forefront of technology and information. I do want to say I enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed your country, because I actually did visit his country. He says, yes, better country. I'm like, by what measure? Sharia law? Is it a methodology based on common sense? And this is more of a rhetoric tactic at this point. Like, he's kind of clearly demonstrating that he's resorting to petty insults instead of actual, like, addressing of points. So I just kind of start shit-talking him and try to, like, blow him out. And also, he was taking a really slow time to respond. So that kind of told me like he was thinking of insults to come up with. So I kind of just like threw a bunch of them in there. So I said methodology based on common sense. He's like, at least we know what is our gender. I'm like, oh yes, science disagrees with this as well, because it does. And he said, and I said, you must be unaware. This is why we laugh at conservatives in our country, because they deny science. The student says, no disrespect, but I think you were sinking in deep shit. And soon you're going to fuck up. And I say, no disrespect, but I don't really care what you think since you're anti-science and academia. I can explain the gender thing if you haven't Googled it yet. I mean, there hasn't really been a substantive counter other than common sense. He said, I don't want you to explain. Like, have fun Googling then. He says, we have our academia, you have yours. I'm like, funny how ours is better in every measurable capacity. And I made a spelling mistake, so I made a joke about spelling. And then he's like, we also think that ours is better than yours. I'm like, haha, yeah, but you can't prove it. Hence why I said measurable capacity. And he says, that's why our science is taken from ancient civilizations. Which what he was trying to make at was basically, because I'm not going to lie, I don't know too much about Sharia law, or other than I don't want it. But I think after talking to that guy, I substantiated. Yeah, here we go. Basically, Arabic numerals, 1, 2, are commonly used for symbols when writing numbers. The term often implies a positional notation using the numerals as well as the decimal base, which, we take all kinds of shit from all different cultures, but I think I talked about that anyway. He says, that's why your science is taken from ancient Islamic civilization. I'm like, if that's true, then why do you disagree with so many of its principles? Honestly, if we were using your logic, then Christian principles have done a way better job at shaping our society. Things like gravity and, although some of them are faulty in the fact that we came from a European nation, etc. I think the Big Bang as well. And he says, the numerals you are using is Arabic. Algorithms and algebra is Persian Islamic. I'm like, okay. Quantum physics is Islamic, which I'm not sure. Is that? I thought it probably is. Is quantum physics Islamic? Oh, that's not what I'm asking. Is quantum physics based out of Islam? Jesus Christ. Quantum. Jesus Christ. It's like Muslim quantum shit. Honestly, I think Christians do this too. They delve into like the quantum world to try to establish some argument for God. Which boils down to just your cosmological shit. Then why do you disagree with them? I actually don't know what this is. Oh shit. But I don't know. I don't know much about Islam. Oh, it's a community in Spain. Oh shit, that's cool. Then why do you disagree with them? Because yeah, a lot of what he was trying to do earlier was delve into like the religious talking points. Like he wanted to attack the Trinity, he wanted to attack all these things. I'm just like, you can spend all day there, and it's utterly uninteresting. And I know that they're going to boil down to similar arguments that Christians use anyway. So anyway, with that said, numbers that lead us to math and biology, which objectively agrees with the gender stuff. Scientifically, there are only two genders, male and female, which that's not true. First off, he confused sex and gender. Second off, there's differences than just X, Y, and which he talks about down here, XX and XY. And I'm pretty sure there's like XX males or XY females. There's like different chromosomal compositions. There's also intersex people. There's like tons of different examples that show that there aren't only two sexes. Now the idea is like, it's not the norm. That doesn't. Nobody gives a fuck if it's the norm. It exists. So like, why create a system that's gonna like punish people for simply being different? Like it's stupid as fuck, man. So he says scientific. Yeah, I say why not take the good things and leave the junk? Nope, and that's in reference to. And I said, go to Google since you don't want me to explain. And then he does want me to explain. He says, what are XX and XY? I'm like, oh my god, you're making so many mistakes already, Lowell. I don't want you to explain. You really do just pivot to the next talking point when I've annihilated the previous one. Because I did. I addressed every single fucking thing. He says, I don't need your scientific knowledge. I've explained so much, but you can't answer one point. It's pathetic. And at this point, I mean, I've kind of just lost respect for him because he's just pivoting to the next thing. Like, it's utter trash. And, like, racists do this stuff when they don't have a good fucking argument. Because they don't have a good argument. They're not on the left. So he says, yeah, you can shove that knowledge in Justin Trudeau's ass. He probably thought it was kept from Canada or America. And I say, that's okay. His economy will shit on yours because it likely will. And he says, not that I like Justin Trudeau. Because I mean, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan. I mean, I think there's probably worse people out there. But I don't know. He just seemed kind of unlikable. But I don't know. I also don't know a ton about him. But in this case, I just wanted to specify that I wasn't like super supporting him, so that was the intent there. He said, so those guys who support genocide in Palestine, which I'm not like pro-Israel, bomb the fuck out of Gaza kind of shit. Like I think technically out of the two places, Israel's probably done worse to Gaza, or to the Palestinians, I should say. I don't think it's at all practical for Israel to just be absolved of its governance, unfortunately. And I get most Palestinians want a Palestinian state. I get it. I think Israel should incorporate reparative solutions to the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They've also, with the Israeli settlers, Palestine's kind of like a two-state solution is getting kind of hard. So it'd be ideal if everybody can just like get past their differences, work in an economy, and then vote for values based on that. Which most Palestinians want a social democracy in regard to like allowing all political parties. I know there's some who don't. I think it's more extreme in the Gaza Strip. But yeah, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen. I think Hamas is not good. I mean, I get people want to say that, but I mean, I don't think Hamas is good. I just don't like the killing of innocents effectively. And there's so much misinformation surrounding it, it's really hard to get a grasp on shit. But, yeah, I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, so where were we here? Yeah, more Joe Biden's ass, and I said, those guys are supporting genocide in Palestine. I think I'm going to learn signs and more from these guys. I'm like, whoa, you were so rational, resorting to petty insults, because these had nothing to do with any of my arguments. These are just attacks at the countries that they could have lived in. So I said, haha, and I'm like, I'm not pro-Israel. He's like, you were just Masonic slaves, Jesus Christ. So, and then I'm like, no, they aren't scholars. This is more into the Biden, Justin Trudeau thing. I said, lol. And I said, I must have really pissed you off. And this was just kind of rile him up because he's clearly irritated because he keeps talking. He says, your country allowed homosexuality to become homosexual. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, it's not even an argument. And I said, just resorting to ad hominems like the trash you are, which was probably a little bit harsh. But I mean, I don't know. I just wanted to rile him up at this point. I said, your country allowed LGBTQ to you become LGBTQ. I mean, I don't know what he means by that because it's a fucking incoherent statement. But I think if he means me literally, like, it doesn't necessarily follow. I said, lol, I've destroyed you on this, no common sense, buddy. You must not listen either. This was genuinely pathetic from a representative of one of the biggest religions of the world. I hope your scholars aren't anything like you. Pretty shit practice. He said, do you know Americans killed 120 million natives? Yes, we did. Yes, and they sucked dick for that. And bombed 31 countries after World War II. That's true. It sucks dick. But I mean, it's war. I'm not going to justify all of them. But yes, war, shit like this happens. And then I said, so, this is your pivot since you can't answer any points. Do you even know what a non sequitur is? I wish I had emojis to laugh as hard as I am in real life. Like, bro, seriously, read some books, man. How can I take anything you say seriously when you can't spell, but I meant substantiate anything. You just resort to ad hominem attacks, man. When you do that, no American or Western country takes you seriously. Oh boy, ad hominem. And in this, he was just he was not responding here, so I just said, oh boy, ad hominem. And did let's go. Just to kind of like irritate him, I said, take your time. You can conjure up something original. He's like, read Arab Civilization by Gustave Le Bon, which this is probably a good book to read. I said, I'm not reading shit from an idiot like you. I've read from people who actually can think. Oh boy, ad hominem, because he was taking a while to type. He's kind of just shell-shocked, I guess. He said, you just want to force your... like, this is not a retort, man. And then he's like... Then I'm just like, lol, Google ad hominem, dumbass, you're so fucking stupid. He says, I don't care. I'm like, I know you, and that's your problem. And then he said, you can shove your science in the ass of America. I'm like, lol. He said, haha. I'm like, they'll shit on you, don't worry. Which I don't mean violent intent by that, so please don't take that way. But it just meant more in like a general kind of economic sense, like we're better in that regard. Anyway, imagine I take science from Americans. Blah, haha, this is actually pathetic. An American wants to teach me science. Ha ha ha. I mean, you don't have to listen to me. Surely you have universities. The funny thing is they'll teach you what I've told you, although they'll probably ignore the LGBTQ science. Yeah, we have a civilization, even if suffering. I'm like, great, what a low bar to meet. That was probably, I don't know, he might have been just trying to like answer a question, but I don't know. I was kind of just full like aggravate mode. He said, God forbid homosexuality, LGBTQ. I'm like, deep. He said, if God is telling me to do this, what can I do? I said, you can't prove it's God. You can't deduce that God is Allah because your religion is retarded and contradicts science, the entire premise you built everything off of. I appreciate your monumental effort. Have fun living in ignorance. And then I disconnected, and he was conjuring up a response like he had just kind of started typing, and I was just like, exit. Just because, I just knew it's going to be like another pivot away from everything. So anyway, that was just kind of me trying to work on rhetoric stuff, like just how you treat a conversation. Because normally, like you want him like severely, you want him feeling like he couldn't address anything, and he resorted to cheap tactics, which he shouldn't be for. And I tried to be like ultra confident in my responses. And, just kind of like blasting insults one after another. And by the way, if you are Islamic or Muslim and you're watching this, I do not hate you at all. This was mainly, like, I don't like religion in particularly, especially like conservative religion, because it runs into really stupid ideologies that involve way too much violence and death. So it's not cool. But anyway, like if you're religious, I don't hate you. If you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, any other, I don't hate you. I have religious family. I have religious friends. I I think it's totally fine to be religious. Like, be religious, but if you want to talk to me on the logical foundation of it, like, I'm sorry. I'm going to fight you on it just because I like to fight.